and welcome to Woke Mental Wellness. I'm Cassie, and we are back for another episode. My recording schedule has not happened. It just hasn't, because 2020, it's a year or possibly a decade. We're unsure at this point. But there's some exciting reasons why I've been so irregular this time. And one of them is because I have officially opened my own business. Intersection Center for Complex Healing is my practice. I'm now providing telehealth therapy during the pandemic to folks. Unfortunately, my caseload is currently full, but you can still get on the wait list. I'll give you more information about that at the end of this episode. Also, for today, I am recording this on September 7th, which is Labor Day. And in light of it being Labor Day and also September being Suicide Prevention Month, we today are going to be talking about workplaces, employment, and the impact that our work or lack thereof has on our mental wellness as Black queer people. So you can look forward to talking about some statistics today to get us started, and then talking about resources and ways to set boundaries and find jobs and get support if your job is treating you poorly. So let's go ahead and jump right in. In general, for all people, the CDC and other researchers for years have been putting out reports, and they show a significant correlation between jobs that are low control, high demand, and long hours, and moderate to severe suicidal ideation. Essentially what that means is that our jobs can really impact the way that we feel in the entirety of our lives, and jobs that have low pay and are high stress, or that are high stress and have long hours, or that are all three really, or jobs that you have very little control in. So jobs that have a lot of micromanaging, jobs where you don't get to determine very much, and you're also working long hours or getting paid very little. All of these can increase the risk of suicidal ideation and suicide attempts based on a 2018 study published by the CDC. I'm going to link that study. The show notes for this episode will be robust, so please check out the show notes. But what's also distressing is that in adults of working age, the lack of a job also correlates to an increased risk of suicide and depression and anxiety. There's so much that we could talk about here, so I'm going to keep it contained. But that's the general public. And then when we come to those of us who have marginalized identities, frequently multiple intersectional marginalized identities, such as being Black and queer, all of these numbers increase. The risk, the unemployment numbers all go up. There was a study that noted that Black trans people, their unemployment rate this was an older study, it was 2011, the Injustice Everywhere study, was 26%, with a 49% attempt rate for respondents. That's massive. The amount of Black trans people living on under $10,000 a year at that point was 34%, which is 4 times higher than the general Black population. That's not even getting into the black-white wage gap. That's not getting into any of that. That's just Black trans people versus Black cis people, essentially. We're once again facing an uphill battle, and these are all, I could keep going with all of these statistics, but that's probably not what you came here for. So the question is what do we do? How do we mitigate all of these effects and the additional effects of if you're trans, non-binary, agender, utilizing pronouns that don't quote unquote fit your appearance, or you're transitioning during work and being misgendered, and those sorts of aggressions and microaggressions, those also have an impact. Those also, as we've talked about before, increase suicide risk, increase depression risk. And so part of what I want to talk about today is being in a job where these things are happening and what to do, how to mitigate it, resources for getting out, as well as if you've been pushed out of a job or don't have a job or have been fired or had to quit a job, resources for finding a new job, hopefully something more affirming, as well as how to manage your wellness while you're out of work, while you're trying to hustle. So let's start with the side of not having a job. When we lose a job, getting fired, getting laid off, having to quit, there's more or less either some options or very little options, depending on what happened and what the circumstances were. So if you were fired, laid off, let go, especially right now during COVID, then you have some options with unemployment, which, I mean, let's be honest, unemployment, generally speaking, is insufficient, especially since the extra $600 has expired for the COVID acts. So it's helpful though, because you have something. And then depending on why you were let go, you may also have gotten a severance, and you may also have the ability to possibly sue if it was discrimination and you are living in a state that does have protections. And with the Supreme Court rulings this year, even if the state doesn't have specific protections, you still may have options to sue if you were pushed out of a job due to discrimination. This is all really stressful though, and since our jobs are so tied to our healthcare, it's also going to potentially be even harder to get support professionally. And so linking yourself and reaching out for links to low and no cost services in your area, looking into sliding scale, pro bono. There are grants and funds that can be available that you can look up. I'll link a couple in the show notes. Being able to get that help that way to keep the stress down, to help you develop a wellness plan. I'm a huge fan of just developing plans, whether you're going to be in work, out of work, just to make sure that you're protecting you, especially since we know that, like I said, suicide rates both in and out of work have been increasing. The pandemic and current events and the increased visibility of racial violence of police towards Black people has all impacted us. In Cook County, the suicide rate among Black residents has skyrocketed. So that makes it even more important that we're protecting our wellness. And this may very well include keying in our employers, which we'll get to that in a moment, coming back to a wellness plan when you're out of work. That can look like scheduling It can look like having a daily routine where you're getting up at a regular time, sleeping regular hours, and filling your day with, it doesn't have to be work, quote unquote, but filling your day with things that keep you active and keep you going. If that means you've got several hours a day where you've got a backlog of books, maybe you're like me, and you have a backlog of books that you've been wanting to read, and you make sure to schedule in, okay, each day I'm going to get up, I'm going to have breakfast, I'm going to have my coffee, I'm going to go for a walk, and then I'm going to, make sure that I've got a solid 3-4 hours of reading. And then I'm going to spend an hour or two on the job hunt, and then I'm going to catch up on Lovecraft Country. That's perfectly viable. Making sure to notice when you're pressuring yourself around what you're doing or not doing with your day is also going to be really important. We are all carrying a lot of complex traumas from just who we are and living in this world. And so noticing when you're putting pressure on yourself because something doesn't count. I think that's one of the things I hear the most is people discounting the things they do during the day because they're not in a very strictly, narrowly defined category of productive. And a lot of times what gets discounted is stuff that we do for ourselves, stuff that makes us feel good. And we need Black joy. We need joy and pleasure and things that make us smile in our lives. So give yourself that space. Include those things in your schedule. And this goes, let's be honest, this goes even if you are working. Like, make sure, especially right now, that every day you've got at least one thing that is just something that is for your pleasure, for your enjoyment. That's going to keep your brain going in a way that tends to mitigate those negative spirals and those anxiety spirals and those depression spirals. We've covered some ways to get professional help if you're out of a job, some things you can do on your own, and I want to also make sure that we also touch on natural supports, which are essentially just the people around you that you aren't paying to be kind of mental health help, or even if you don't want to put it that way, just like friends and loved ones who are helpful to your wellness. This pandemic and having to distance and being worried about getting sick or getting someone else sick and how we do this has really isolated us. And if that's already something that you struggle with, it's going to be even more important to communicate to friends and let them know, like, okay, so I can't Zoom for 4 hours a day. I hate it. I want to stay offline. How else can we stay connected? Because I do still want to stay connected. And working out social distancing hangouts, working out a pandemic pod, building those things to keep you going and to keep you active and invested in a lot of ways in the world. As you look for a job or wait for benefits or whatever your path leads you on, or like me, opening a business. Okay, so let's move on to looking for a job and a job search that will hopefully help with finding meaningful work that is going to be, if not healthy, at least a non-toxic environment. When you're looking for a job, as a Black queer person, make sure that you are really giving consideration to what you want out of this position and out of the job. It's okay if that's just, I need to pay rent. And also keeping in mind, so paying rent is incredibly important, as well as if this job is also transphobic, homophobic in some way, is that going to get in the way of you paying your rent? And in that, you're going to start missing work, or you're going to get really depressed and have to take time off. And those sorts of things really are important to include in your job search. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't actually do much good. And as we talked about the statistics, it doesn't actually do much good to have a job that makes you sick. And the unfortunate fact is that based on these studies, for the past 2 decades at this point, unions and worker protections have been on the decline, and it doesn't seem so odd that work-related suicides have been on the increase. And so paying attention to not just the pay, but also, is this a place that you can work in? Is this a position that might actually be something where you can maintain some level of health and wellness while doing this position? If the answer is no, then I strongly encourage you to consider continuing your job search, even if you have to take that job in the moment. And then, as part of that interview process, watching your anxiety, watching the pressure to just take a job so that you're doing something real, so that you have a real job. You can't see me, but I'm doing air quotes because sarcastic. All jobs are real jobs. But making sure to ask. I know one question that a lot of people have asked to their interview is, how did you protect your workers when the pandemic started? How are you protecting them now? Questions about leave, sick time, how much responsibility a workplace takes if someone gets sick with COVID, as well as, does your health insurance cover mental health benefits? Is telehealth included in those benefits? Are all good things to ask and things that are going to protect you and your wellness. Asking about the makeup of the workplace. Asking what kind of trainings, what kind of diversity and inclusion initiatives and things they have. Do they bring in organizations like Praxis or the Chicago Therapy Collective in order to train them of how to be good employers to trans people, to queer people, to Black people? Are all going to be important, and I hope you'll include in your job search to make sure that you get and have something that's sustainable. I know I personally left a job that was very toxic, and a lot of times it's not until after you get out of those environments and you realize, oh man, all this misgendering, all of this bigotry, all of this low-key punitive nature in this position really affected me. And so once you're in a job, moving into that realm of once you're in a job, giving yourself space at least once a week to connect with yourself, to breathe, to take some time to say, how am I doing? how is this feeling? How much stress am I carrying with me? Are my shoulders up next to my ears? Is all going to be really important to maintaining that wellness. Am I having thoughts about wanting to die every time I go to work, every time Monday rolls around? If you are, that's a good sign that at the least, probably a conversation with whatever manager or supervisor you're having would be very appropriate to have about what's happening in the workplace and about whether or not you can shift your schedule, taking a vacation. A lot of times the biggest thing that bites us is not asking, because yeah, jobs can be really stressful and there are some really toxic and bigoted workplaces out there for sure. And also a lot of times we just don't ask because we don't think it's possible, or we get in our heads anxious about, well, I can't say anything, I just have to wait, maybe it'll get better. No, that first step is on you to say, I am feeling burnt out. 2020 is a year and I need more days a week in order to do my job effectively. I need more time. I need more space. I need to be able to work from home. I need X thing or that thing, and possibly even providing a therapist or a doctor's note to corroborate that. At worst, it may mean that it's time to start looking for another job, particularly if you've taken those steps and you've stated, hey, this productivity requirement is bonkers. I think we need to reconsider this. It's a lot. And especially if you've talked to your coworkers and they're feeling the same way, and everyone's talked to management and they're insistent or increasing expectations instead of caring about their people, then yeah, that's a good sign that this may not be the place for you. You can love your job and you can love what you do and still be in the wrong place for doing it. I think that's a realization that I had, and part of what led to me opening my own business is just this idea of, it's Labor Day and we're talking about hours and work weeks and things like that, right? And the expectations keep going up and people keep expecting people to work during these pandemics and have that same level of productivity despite the world going to hell in a handbasket. And it's not realistic and it's not healthy, and there's no amount of attempting to think yourself out of it that is going to combat that level of employer negligence. And so being honest with yourself about where that blame lies. There's a lot of talk about self-care, and it's really important to note that there is no amount of self-care that can fix a cruel and or negligent employer who is shirking their responsibility to their employees. Self-care is important, and we all have an obligation to ourselves to heal and take care of ourselves. But one of the biggest barriers to burnout prevention and wellness and self-care that people note in surveys, in responses that I have seen in even groups of therapists, is employers and their refusal to acknowledge the human needs of their employees. When you're looking for jobs, that is also something to ask. When you're in a job and you're noticing that maybe you get into the job and they talked a good game, and then you get in and you realize everyone's talking about how great it is that they haven't taken a vacation in 4 months. That is probably something to bring up as a culture issue. If you're productivity level, I'll speak from a therapist side of things. If you go to a therapist and, you're interviewing your therapist and trying to figure out if they're the right fit, one thing you can't ask them, how big is your caseload? Research has shown that a caseload over 25 to 26 clients, at that point, once you get over that point, the therapist's work, the efficacy of treatment, goes down and therapists burn out faster. So that's something really important to note, is if you're going somewhere and, your therapist caseload is, if they're supposed to be booking something like, 30 to 35 people a week, then that is something important for you as a client to know. And for any other therapist listening, if that's the expectation of your workplace, that's probably something you should push back really hard against. And if they're not willing to listen, then that might be time to leave. Especially in this pandemic, we are not built to be in Zoom sitting at these computers for 40, 50, 60 hours a week. And that includes school. Like, we're trying to manage things, but it's important to note the impact these things have on our health and wellness, the ways in which we can start to feel in a rut, hopeless, unproductive. If your attention is wavering and you have this expectation on yourself that you're going to be full attention all day, every meeting, that's unrealistic. And so readjusting that expectation, and if that expectation is being carried down through employer and manager expectations of, you have to have your video on at all times, you have to be attentive at all times, then once again, that's something to push back against. This is Labor Day when I'm recording this. It'll come out later this week. And so remember, our power is in a collective. Part of wellness as an employee or as a former employee may be getting together with other people and initiating action, starting a union, sending an open letter to your employer about the nature of the conditions they've created being unacceptable. It might mean preparing to leave jobs. All of these things are connected, right? And if this all goes similarly for discrimination, the levels of discrimination for Black queer people are astronomical. That 2011 study that I cited earlier also noted that nearly almost half of all respondents had reported being harassed and discriminated against at work or school. Harassment is trauma. Trauma is going to impact your ability to work. And if you're putting that onto yourself, then that is going to come back very negatively, and judgment and blame and self-hatred start to come out in the forms of depression, difficulty sleeping or sleeping too much, and all of these signs and symptoms that we talk about. And so, one, the ideal is to have a workplace that is actually good and good to you. But the other is to make sure that we have something outside of work. American society is so work-centric in so many unhealthy ways that a lot of times we forget that we are not our jobs. We are not just our jobs. And that it's important to have full and robust lives outside of our careers, even if you love your career. I love what I do. I've had some bad places where I've done it, and those absolutely made me feel like I needed way more time than what I could take. But even being in a place where I love what I do and I'm in a position where I can do it in whatever way I want, I still need time. Loving your job doesn't mean that you won't burn out. Being in the career of your choice doesn't mean you don't need vacations. It's proven, and other societies embrace this wholly, that time off, shorter work days, more employee rights and benefits actually improve productivity because happy people are more likely to want to do things. So I want to make sure that we go through some resources as promised, because there's some helpful things coming up, particularly in the Chicago area. Sorry for people that are other places, but this is what I know. I do want to highlight that the Work Job Fair, WERQ, through Center on Halsted, in collaboration with some other organizations, including the Chicago Therapy Collective, CTC, and their Hire Trans Now initiative, is happening this month. It has moved virtual and is over 2 days, so it has been expanded. That is going to be September 17th and 18th from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. You can find the information on Center on Halsted's website as well as their Facebook page. I will link the Facebook event page with the link to sign up for the job fair on it in the show notes. As mentioned, the Chicago Therapy Collective has several initiatives that if you are an employer and you want to increase your supportiveness to your trans and queer employees, they have trainings for you that you can take in order to cut down on the amount of aggressions and microaggressions that may be happening in the workplace, because those are big deals and are going to impact your workers' productivity, their desire to be at work, your retention, your turnover rate, all of that sort of thing, because unhealthy work environments mean sick workers mean missed hours, if we need to put it that way. Hopefully we don't need to go past it's the right thing to do. I'll also link some sliding scale information for therapists. If you're looking for a therapist during this time, I know things are really hard. And so I'll link some of those resources in the show notes as well. And just a little bit more as we come to a close now about intersections. I am also able to now provide some sliding scale services. And while right now my caseload is full, I do have a wait list, so you can email if you are interested in services. I also do trainings and speaking gigs. Hopefully I will start to do more blogs and writing because those have gone over fairly well. And so if you're at all interested in getting in contact with me, the Intersections website is i-cc, both as in cat, h.com. I will link that website in the show notes. My email's on the website as well. You can always send me a message. I'm doing a training on the impact of complex trauma on intimacy and trust and treatment for NASW, the National Association of Social Workers, Illinois chapter, on October 8th. So if you are a clinician and you are listening to this, you can sign up for that. I will go ahead and link that in the notes as well. And I'll link some other fun things that I've done recently. I did a interview on the Transforming Trauma podcast through the NARM Training Institute. So lots of things are happening. There are now good reasons why my recording schedule has been so irregular. I am working to make it regular. So also, if you have anything that you would like to hear about coming up, send me an email or leave a message on the Facebook page, Woke Mental Wellness, or message me at Mental Woke on Twitter, and let me know if there's anything that you want to hear about. Please remember to join the Patreon. I do want to thank my first 2 patrons, Julie and Margaret. Thank you both. Your support is super helpful, and I hope for more people to join you soon. Thank you, everybody. Please stay well, and please know that if you're worried about any of your friends right now, reach out to them. Don't wait for people who may be struggling to reach out to you. In trying to help people through this year, it's really important to remember that a lot of times when we are feeling really down, when we are at our lowest, reaching out isn't something that feels like we can do. So if you have the energy, if you have the spoons, please reach out to your friends, loved ones, acquaintances, and whoever you can. I'll see you next time for another episode of Woke Mental Wellness, a podcast for Black queer people by a Black queer person.